She stepped off the train with a baby in her arms and a promise that had already turned to ash. Caroline Mercer stood alone on the platform in Willow Bend, Texas, scanning the crowd for a man who would never come. The telegram had been clear. Arrive August 12th. I will marry you. But as the minutes stretched and the station emptied, the truth settled over her like a shroud. He wasn't coming. She had no money, no family, and nowhere to go. The sun beat down mercilessly, and her daughter Lily whimpered against her chest. Just as Caroline's knees began to buckle, a shadow fell across her face. A tall cowboy with dust on his boots and kindness in his eyes stepped forward and said quietly, "Ma'am, let me help you. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far Caroline's story travels." Now let's step into 1875 Texas, where one woman's courage will rewrite everything. The train's whistle faded into the distance, leaving behind only the echo of broken promises and the relentless Texas heat. Caroline Mercer stood on the wooden platform of Willow Bend Station, her arms aching from holding 8-month-old Lily, her heart aching from something far worse. Around her, families reunited with laughter and embraces. Husbands lifted wives off their feet. Children ran into waiting arms. But Caroline stood alone, a solitary figure in a faded blue traveling dress, clutching a carpet bag that contained everything she owned in the world. She had read the telegram so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases. Come to Willow Bend. I will marry you and provide for you and the child. Arrive August 12th. Robert Tenley. She had believed every word. She had sold what little she had, left the only home she'd ever known, and traveled 3 days by train with a baby who cried through the nights and drew disapproving stares from other passengers. All for a man she had met only twice, who had seemed kind, who had promised salvation. Now, as the platform cleared and the afternoon sun blazed overhead, Caroline understood with crushing clarity that Robert Tenley was not coming. "You lost, miss." A woman's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and curious. Caroline turned to find a plump woman in a green dress studying her with narrow eyes. 2 other women flanked her, their expressions a mix of pity and suspicion. "I'm waiting for someone," Caroline said, trying to keep her voice steady. Lily stirred against her shoulder, her small hand gripping Caroline's collar. "Waiting for who?" the woman pressed. "Everyone's gone home already. You've been standing here near 20 minutes. Caroline's throat tightened. "A gentleman, Mr. Robert Tenley. He was supposed to meet me." The women exchanged glances. The one in green let out a small, knowing laugh. "Robert Tenley? Oh, honey, Robert Tenley left town 3 days ago. Took the stage to Fort Worth. Word is he's got debts all over this county and didn't plan on sticking around to pay them." The world tilted. Caroline felt her grip on Lily tighten as her vision blurred at the edges. "That can't be right. He sent for me. He promised—" "Men promise a lot of things they don't deliver," the woman interrupted, not unkindly but without softness. "You got people here? Family?" "No," Caroline whispered. "No one." The women's expressions shifted, hardening. The tallest one, a thin woman with severe features, leaned in. "And the baby? Where's her father?" Caroline's silence was answer enough. The women stepped back as if she carried something contagious. The one in green shook her head slowly. "Well, I don't know what you expected to find here, but this is a respectable town. You might want to catch the next train back to wherever you came from." They turned and walked away, their skirts swishing in judgment. Caroline stood frozen, Lily's weight growing heavier in her trembling arms. The station master appeared in his doorway, his face creased with concern, but also with something else, wariness. "Miss, I'm going to lock up now. You got somewhere to go?" Caroline opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. She had 47 cents in her purse. The next train wouldn't leave until morning, and even if it did, she had no destination and no means to pay for passage. She was stranded in a strange town with a baby, no husband, and a reputation that had been destroyed before she'd even stepped foot on solid ground. "I need a moment," she managed to say. "Please." The station master nodded slowly. 5 minutes. Then I got to close up." Caroline walked to the edge of the platform and sat down heavily on a wooden bench, setting her carpet bag beside her. Lily fussed, her small face red from the heat. Caroline pulled out a cloth and dabbed at her daughter's forehead, whispering soft reassurances she didn't believe herself. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In another life, Caroline might have found it beautiful. Now it only reminded her that night was coming and she had nowhere to sleep. "You can't stay here, you know." A man's voice, rough but not unkind. Caroline looked up sharply, her protective instinct flaring, but the man who approached wasn't threatening. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He wore work clothes, a chambray shirt rolled at the sleeves, worn denim trousers, dusty boots. A cowboy, she guessed. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. "I know," Caroline said quietly. "I just need a moment to think." "Thinking's good," the man said, "but the sun sets fast out here, and this isn't a safe place for a woman alone after dark." He glanced at Lily, especially with a baby. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I appreciate your concern, but I'll manage." "Will you?" He didn't say it cruelly, just factually. "You got 47 cents and nowhere to go. Robert Tenley's gone and he's not coming back." Caroline's head snapped up. "How do you know what I have?" "I heard those ladies talking. Word travels fast in a town this small." He shifted his weight, his gaze steady and honest. "My name's Colt Ramsey. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of here. I'm not trying to frighten you or make assumptions, ma'am, but you're in a bad spot, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." "I don't need charity," Caroline said, even as her stomach growled audibly, and Lily began to cry in earnest. Colt's expression softened. "It's not charity, it's decency. You got a name?" She hesitated, then lifted her chin. "Caroline Mercer. This is Lily." "Miss Mercer," Colt said carefully, "I'm not going to pretend I know your story or how you ended up here, but I know what it's like to be alone and out of options. I've got a bunkhouse that's empty, food in the kitchen, and work that needs doing if you're willing. No strings, no expectations. Just a place to rest until you figure out your next step." Caroline studied him, searching for the lie, the trap, the hidden cost. But his eyes were clear, his posture open. He looked like a man who'd been knocked down by life himself and understood what it meant to need a hand up. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't know me." "No, I don't," Colt agreed. "But I know what it feels like to be judged for things you can't change. And I know that baby needs a roof over her head tonight." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You don't have to trust me, Miss Mercer, but you do have to make a choice. You can sit here until the station master runs you off, or you can let me help. Your call." Lily's cries grew louder, and Caroline felt the last of her strength crumbling. She had no other options, no plan, no miracle coming to save her. The stranger with kind eyes and dusty boots was the only lifeline being offered. "All right," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Colt nodded. "Just for tonight," he repeated, though something in his tone suggested he knew it would be longer. He picked up her carpet bag without asking and gestured toward a wagon parked near the edge of the station. "Come on, let's get you both out of this heat." Caroline stood on unsteady legs and followed him, Lily clutched tightly to her chest. As they walked past the station, she saw faces in windows, people watching, judging. She straightened her spine and kept her eyes forward, let them think what they wanted. She had survived worse than their stares. Colt helped her into the wagon seat with surprising gentleness, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horses pulled forward and Willow Bend began to fade behind them. Caroline didn't look back. There was nothing there for her but broken promises and cruel whispers. The ride out to Colt's ranch was quiet, except for the creaking of the wagon wheels and Lily's occasional whimpers. Caroline focused on the landscape, rolling plains dotted with scrub brush, distant mesas painted purple in the fading light, a sky so vast it made her feel both insignificant and strangely free. This was a hard land, unforgiving and raw, but there was a beauty to it she hadn't expected. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked, needing to break the silence. "About 3 years," Colt said. "Bought it with money I saved working cattle drives. It's not much yet, but it's mine." "Do you run it alone?" "Mostly. I've got a couple of hands who come during branding season, but day to day, it's just me." He glanced at her. I'm not going to lie to you, Miss Mercer. It's a rough life. The work's hard, the hours are long, and there's not much comfort to be had. But if you're willing to work, I can use the help, and you can earn your keep. What kind of help? Caroline asked cautiously. Cooking, mostly, mending, general upkeep of the house. I'm not much good at keeping things clean, and I can barely boil water without burning it. He grinned slightly. A woman's touch would go a long way toward making the place livable. Caroline felt a flicker of hope. I can cook. And clean. I'm good with my hands. Then we'll get along just fine, Colt said. And before you ask, no, I'm not expecting anything improper. You'll have your own space, your privacy, and your dignity. That's a promise. Caroline studied his profile in the dimming light, the strong line of his jaw, the calm set of his shoulders. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Why are you doing this? She asked again, softer this time. Colt was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and honest. Because someone did it for me once. When I was 17, I lost my parents to a fever, had nothing but the clothes on my back and a head full of anger. A rancher named Thomas Beck took me in, taught me the trade, treated me like a son. He didn't have to, he just did. Said the measure of a man isn't what he takes from the world, but what he gives back. He looked at Caroline. I figure it's my turn to give back. Tears welled in Caroline's eyes, and this time she didn't fight them. They slid silently down her cheeks as the wagon rolled on through the Texas twilight. Lily had finally fallen asleep against her shoulder, her tiny body warm and trusting. Caroline pressed a kiss to her daughter's head and allowed herself for the first time in weeks to feel a fragile thread of hope. They arrived at the ranch just as the last light bled from the sky. It was a modest spread, a simple ranch house with a covered porch, a barn, a corral with a few horses, and fields stretching out in every direction. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and real, and it felt like sanctuary. Colt helped her down from the wagon and led her inside. The house was sparsely furnished, but clean enough. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs sat in the center of the main room, and a narrow hallway led to what Caroline assumed were bedrooms. You and the baby can take the back room, Colt said, lighting a lantern. It's small, but it's got a good bed and a window that catches the morning sun. I'll sleep out in the bunkhouse for now. Give you your space. You don't have to do that, Caroline protested. This is your home. And you're my guest, Colt said firmly. At least until we figure out something more permanent. He showed her the room, a simple space with a bed, a small dresser, and a rocking chair in the corner. Caroline set Lily down gently on the bed, and the baby sighed in her sleep, finally at peace. Caroline turned to Colt, words catching in her throat. Thank you, she managed. I don't know how to repay you. You already did, Colt said quietly. You trusted me enough to come here. That's more than most people would do. He stepped back toward the door. Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning. He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Caroline was alone with her daughter for the first time since stepping off that cursed train. She sank into the rocking chair and let the tears come fully now, great silent sobs that shook her shoulders. She cried for the promises broken, for the fear she'd carried for so long, for the exhaustion that had nearly destroyed her. But she also cried with relief, because for the first time in months, she and Lily were safe. Eventually, the tears stopped. Caroline wiped her face, stood, and began to unpack her meager belongings. A few changes of clothes for her and Lily, a small wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring, a Bible her grandmother had given her, and a photograph of her parents, long dead. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She lay down beside Lily, pulling a thin blanket over them both, and closed her eyes. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of cattle lowing, the wind rustling through the grass, the steady rhythm of a life that went on regardless of heartbreak or hope. And somewhere in the darkness, Colt Ramsey was bedding down in the bunkhouse, a stranger who had offered kindness when the world had offered none. Caroline didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she could truly trust this man, if this fragile safety would last, or if the town would come calling with their judgment and scorn. But for tonight, she was warm, her daughter was safe, and that was enough. She drifted into a dreamless sleep, the first real rest she'd had in weeks, and when the sun rose over the Texas plains the next morning, it found Caroline Mercer still standing, still breathing, still fighting for the life she and Lily deserved. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Caroline hadn't expected. She woke early, before the sun fully crested the horizon, and found Colt already in the barn tending to the horses. He would nod at her through the open door, his greeting simple and respectful, and then disappear into his work, while Caroline set about making breakfast. The kitchen was functional, but neglected, and Caroline took quiet satisfaction in restoring order to it. She scrubbed the stove until it gleamed, organized the pantry, and discovered that Colt had been surviving on beans, hardtack, and the occasional charred attempt at bacon. Her first real meal, scrambled eggs, fresh biscuits, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead, earned her a look of genuine astonishment from her host. "Miss Mercer," Colt said, sitting at the table with his plate, "if you cook like this every day, I might never let you leave." Caroline managed a small smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It's a fact," Colt said, biting into a biscuit and closing his eyes in appreciation. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "My mother," Caroline said softly. "She ran a boarding house back in Missouri. She always said a good meal could heal most of life's troubles." "Smart woman," Colt said. He looked at her, his expression kind. "You doing all right? I know this is all a lot." Caroline glanced at Lily, who was dozing in a makeshift cradle Colt had fashioned from a drawer and some blankets. "We're managing," she said carefully. "You've been very kind." "You keep saying that like you're waiting for the kindness to run out," Colt observed. "It won't. I meant what I said, Miss Mercer. You and Lily are welcome here as long as you need." Caroline wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been shattered too many times. Still, as the days turned into a week, she began to let her guard down inch by inch. Colt was true to his word. He kept his distance, gave her space, and never once made her feel like she owed him anything more than the work she did around the house. But the town was a different matter. Caroline's first trip into Willow Bend came at the end of her first week on the ranch. Colt needed supplies, and Caroline needed fabric to make new clothes for Lily, who was growing faster than her small wardrobe could keep up. They rode into town together in the wagon, Lily bundled in Caroline's arms, and the moment they arrived, Caroline felt the weight of every stare. People stopped on the boardwalk to watch them pass. Women leaned together, whispering behind gloved hands. Men tipped their hats to Colt, but let their gazes linger on Caroline with open curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. "Ignore them," Colt said quietly as he helped her down from the wagon. "Small towns love to gossip. Give them a week, and they'll find someone else to talk about." Caroline wasn't so sure, but she nodded and followed him into the general store. The shopkeeper, a balding man with spectacles, greeted Colt warmly and then turned a cooler gaze on Caroline. "This the woman staying out at your place?" he asked bluntly. "This is Miss Caroline Mercer," Colt said evenly. "She's helping me run the household." "Uh-huh," the shopkeeper said, his tone thick with skepticism. "Heard she came to town looking for Robert Tenley." "She did," Colt said, "and Tenley left her high and dry, like the coward he is. So I gave her and her daughter a place to stay. Problem with that?" The shopkeeper raised his hands. "No problem. Just people talk, Colt. You know how it is." "Then people can mind their own business," Colt said sharply. He handed the man a list. "Get me these supplies and add whatever Miss Mercer needs." Caroline quietly requested fabric, thread, and a few other essentials, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She could feel the shopkeeper's judgment radiating off him like heat from a stove. When they finished, Colt paid without a word and escorted her back outside. "I'm sorry," Caroline murmured as they loaded the supplies into the wagon. "I didn't mean to cause trouble for you." "You didn't cause anything," Colt said firmly. "They're just narrow-minded fools who have nothing better to do than tear people down." But the damage was done. As they drove back to the ranch, Caroline felt the walls closing in. She had been naive to think she could escape her past, that a new town would mean a fresh start. The truth was written all over her, an unmarried woman with a baby, dependent on a man's charity. It didn't matter that she worked hard or that Colt treated her with nothing but respect. To the people of Willow Bend, she was a fallen woman, and nothing would change their minds. That night, after Lily was asleep, Caroline sat on the porch steps and stared out at the darkening fields. She heard the creak of the bunkhouse door and turned to see Colt approaching, a cup of coffee in each hand. He handed her one and sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked quietly. Caroline didn't answer right away. She sipped the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "I don't know where I'd go." "That's not an answer," Colt said. "I don't have one," Caroline admitted. "I don't have answers for anything anymore. I thought I did when I got on that train. I thought I knew what I was doing. But I was just running, and I ran straight into another disaster." Colt was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "You want to tell me what you were running from?" Caroline's grip tightened on the cup. She had known this question would come eventually, but she still wasn't prepared for it. The truth was ugly, shameful, and it would change the way Colt looked at her. But maybe it was better to get it over with, to let him see exactly what kind of woman he'd taken in. "I wasn't married when I had Lily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her father was a man I thought I loved. He was charming, attentive, and he promised me everything. By the time I realized he was married and had no intention of leaving his wife, it was too late. I was pregnant, and he wanted nothing to do with me." She felt Colt's gaze on her but couldn't bring herself to look at him. "My family disowned me. The people in my town made my life hell. I couldn't find work, couldn't show my face anywhere without being spat at or called names. Robert Tenley was a customer at the boarding house before I lost it. He seemed kind, and when he wrote to me saying he'd moved to Texas and wanted a wife, I thought it was my way out, my chance to give Lily a real life." "And instead he abandoned you," Colt said, his voice edged with anger. "Yes," Caroline said. "Fine. So now you know. I'm exactly what those people in town think I am. A foolish, ruined woman who made terrible choices and dragged an innocent baby into her mess." She finally looked at Colt, expecting to see disgust or disappointment. Instead, his expression was thoughtful, his eyes steady and kind. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he said quietly. "I see a woman who loved someone and got lied to. I see a mother who's fighting like hell to protect her child. I see someone who's been knocked down again and again but keeps getting back up. That's not foolish, Miss Mercer. That's courage." Caroline's breath caught. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it because I have to," Colt said. "I'm saying it because it's true." He set his coffee down and turned to face her fully. "I don't care what happened before you came here. I don't care what people say or think. What I care about is that you're a good person who deserves better than the hand life's dealt you. And as long as you're here, you're going to be treated with respect. That's a promise." Tears slipped down Caroline's cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Colt's expression softened. "Because I know what it's like to feel like the world's against you. Because I believe people deserve second chances. And because—" He hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Because you make the best biscuits I've ever had in my life, and I'd be a fool to let you go." Caroline laughed through her tears, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in so long it felt foreign. "That's the reason?" "That's a big reason," Colt said with mock seriousness. Then his smile faded, and he spoke with quiet sincerity. "But mostly, it's because you and Lily belong here. I don't know why I'm so sure of that, but I am." Caroline didn't know what to say. She had spent so long believing she didn't belong anywhere, that she was a burden, a mistake, a problem to be solved. Hearing Colt say the opposite felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Colt said, standing and offering her his hand. "You haven't seen what a disaster the barn is. I'm going to need your help organizing it tomorrow." Caroline took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "I think I can manage that." "Good," Colt said. "Now get some sleep. Morning comes early around here." He walked back to the bunkhouse, and Caroline returned to the house, her heart lighter than it had been in months. As she checked on Lily and climbed into bed, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that this fragile peace might last, that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could stop running and start living. The barn organization lasted 3 days instead of 1, mostly because Colt had accumulated years of equipment, broken tools, and tangled rope that needed sorting through. Caroline worked methodically, her sleeves rolled up, Lily playing in a patch of sunlight on a blanket nearby. She found a rhythm in the work. The physical labor helped quiet the anxious thoughts that had plagued her for so long. On the third day, as she was hanging bridles on newly installed hooks, she heard voices approaching. She looked up to see Colt walking with another man, younger and broader, with a friendly face and an easy smile. "Miss Mercer," Colt called out, "this is Jake Brennan. He helps out during busy seasons. Jake, this is Caroline Mercer and her daughter Lily." Jake tipped his hat. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Colt's been telling me you've been working miracles around here." Caroline felt herself flush. "I'm just organizing what was already here." "Don't let her fool you," Colt said. "The barn hasn't looked this good since I bought the place." He glanced at Jake. "We're bringing the herd down from the north pasture tomorrow. Could use an extra set of hands if you're available." "I'm available," Jake said, then looked at Caroline. "And I'll be here for meals, if that's all right with you, Miss Mercer. Colt says you cook like an angel." "I cook like someone who learned from her mother," Caroline said, but she couldn't help smiling. "But you're welcome to join us." Jake grinned, looking forward to it. The two men headed off to inspect fencing, and Caroline returned to her work, feeling strangely lighter. It was the first conversation she'd had with someone other than Colt since arriving, and Jake's easy acceptance had been unexpected. Maybe not everyone in Texas was determined to judge her. The next morning brought chaos of the best kind. Colt and Jake rode out before dawn, and by mid-morning Caroline could hear the distant sound of cattle bellowing and hooves thundering across the range. She kept Lily inside, away from the dust and commotion, and focused on preparing a meal substantial enough to feed 2 hungry cowboys. By the time the men returned, sweaty and exhausted, she had beef stew simmering on the stove, fresh bread cooling on the counter, and coffee so strong it could probably strip paint. Colt's eyes lit up when he walked through the door and caught the scent. "Miss Mercer, you're a saint," he said, washing his hands in the basin. "I could eat a whole steer right now." "Let's start with the stew and see how you feel after," Caroline said, ladling generous portions into bowls. Jake joined them, and the three sat at the table while Lily gurgled happily in her cradle. "So," Jake said between mouthfuls, "how long you planning to stay out here, Miss Mercer?" Caroline's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. It was a casual question, but it carried weight. She glanced at Colt, who kept his expression neutral, though she saw the flicker of interest in his eyes. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "As long as Mr. Ramsey will have me, I suppose." "You could stay forever, way you cook," Jake said cheerfully. "Colt here was living on beans and regret before you showed up." Colt shot him a look. "I wasn't that bad." "You were worse," Jake said, grinning. "I once saw you try to fry an egg and somehow set the pan on fire." "That was one time," Colt protested, but Caroline saw the hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. She found herself laughing, a real genuine laugh, and it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. The easy camaraderie continued through the meal, and by the time Jake left for the evening, Caroline felt something she hadn't felt in years. Like she was part of something, like she belonged. It was fragile and new, and she was afraid to trust it, but it was there nonetheless. That night, after Lily was asleep, Caroline stepped outside to get some air. The Texas sky stretched above her, infinite and filled with more stars than she'd ever seen in Missouri. She heard footsteps and turned to find Colt approaching, his hat in his hands. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all," Caroline said. He settled beside her on the porch steps, maintaining that respectful distance he always kept. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "You did good today," Colt said eventually. "Jake won't stop talking about your cooking." "He's easy to please," Caroline said. "He's honest," Colt corrected. "And he's not wrong." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking, Miss Mercer, about your situation." Caroline's stomach tightened. "Oh?" "You've been here almost 3 weeks now," Colt continued. "And in that time, you've worked harder than anyone I've ever hired. The house is cleaner, the meals are better, and honestly, the whole place feels more like a home than it has since I bought it." "Thank you," Caroline said carefully, unsure where this was leading. "What I'm trying to say is, I'd like to make this arrangement official. Not charity, not temporary, a real job. You handle the household, the cooking, general upkeep, and I'll pay you a fair wage. Enough for you to save, maybe even enough to buy your own place someday, if that's what you want." Caroline stared at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Colt said. "You've earned it, Miss Mercer. And more than that, I don't want to lose you. This place needs you. I need you." He caught himself. "I mean, I need the help. The household help." Caroline saw the flush creep up his neck and felt a strange warmth in her chest. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Colt said simply. "Say you'll stay." Caroline looked out at the dark expanse of the ranch, at the life she'd begun to build here. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd stepped off that train, but it was real and honest and filled with more kindness than she'd known in years. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll stay." Colt's smile was worth more than any wage he could have offered. "Good. That's real good." The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt increasingly like a life rather than just survival. Caroline rose early, prepared breakfast, and watched through the kitchen window as Colt worked with the horses. She found herself noticing things about him: the way he moved with quiet confidence, the gentle hands he used with the animals, the patient way he fixed broken things instead of throwing them away. He was different from any man she'd known, and that difference both comforted and unsettled her. Lily was thriving too. The fresh air and steady routine agreed with her, and she'd begun babbling and pulling herself up on furniture. Colt had taken to stopping by in the evenings to check on her, and Caroline watched with a mixture of tenderness and fear as her daughter reached for him with chubby hands, as if recognizing him as someone safe and good. But the town remained a problem. On her second trip into Willow Bend, this time alone while Colt worked the far pasture, Caroline encountered the full force of the community's judgment. She'd just left the general store when a woman in an elaborate purple dress stepped directly into her path. "You're the woman staying with Colt Ramsey," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I work for Mr. Ramsey," Caroline said evenly, adjusting Lily on her hip. "Work," the woman repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of that arrangement. "I'm Constance Hartwell. My husband owns the bank, and I think you should know that decent people in this town are concerned about the situation at the Ramsey Ranch." Caroline felt her spine stiffen. "I'm not sure what situation you're referring to, Mrs. Hartwell." "A single woman living with a single man with a bastard child," Constance said, her voice carrying across the street. Several people stopped to listen. "It's unseemly. It reflects poorly on all of us." The word bastard landed like a slap. Caroline held Lily tighter, her daughter blissfully unaware of the poison being directed at her. "My daughter is innocent," Caroline said, her voice shaking with restrained fury, "and my living arrangements are none of your concern." "They are when they bring shame to this community," Constance countered. "Colt Ramsey is a respected man. We'd hate to see his reputation tarnished by association with someone of your character." "My character," Caroline repeated. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you came here chasing a man who didn't want you," Constance said coldly. "I know you have a child with no father, and I know that Colt Ramsey deserves better than to be trapped by a woman with nowhere else to go." The crowd around them had grown. Caroline saw faces, some sympathetic, most merely curious, a few openly hostile. She wanted to defend herself, to explain, to make them understand. But she knew it wouldn't matter. They'd already decided who she was. "Excuse me," Caroline said quietly, and pushed past Constance. She heard the whispers follow her as she walked to the wagon, heard the laughter that felt like knives in her back. By the time she reached the ranch, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. Colt found her in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with Lily in her arms, tears streaming silently down her face. He crossed to her immediately, kneeling in front of her. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with concern. Caroline told him everything, the words tumbling out between sobs. Colt's jaw clenched tighter and tighter as she spoke, his hands balling into fists. "That vicious woman," he said when she finished. "Caroline, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you about Constance Hartwell. She's got a mean streak a mile wide and delights in making people miserable." "She called Lily a bastard," Caroline whispered. "In front of everyone." Colt's expression darkened. Then she's not worth the dirt on your boots. Neither is anyone who listened to her garbage. He reached out carefully and took Caroline's hand. Listen to me. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. And anyone who treats you or Lily with anything less than respect will answer to me. I don't want to cause problems for you, Caroline said. Maybe I should leave. Go somewhere else where people don't know. No, Colt said firmly. You're not running again. You've done nothing wrong, and I won't let them drive you away. He squeezed her hand. We'll figure this out together, but you're staying. You hear me? Caroline looked into his eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Not pity, not obligation, but genuine care. Maybe even something deeper. It terrified her. I hear you, she said softly. Colt nodded and stood. Good. Now come inside. Let's get some food in you, and then we're going to forget all about Constance Hartwell and her poisonous tongue. But forgetting proved impossible. Over the next few weeks, the gossip intensified. People stared more openly when Caroline went to town. Children were pulled away when she passed. Even the shopkeeper became curt and hurried in his service. It wore on her, a constant weight of judgment that made her feel like she was drowning. The only bright spot was the ranch itself. There, away from prying eyes and cruel whispers, Caroline found peace. She and Colt developed an easy partnership. He handled the outdoor work while she managed the household, and in the evenings they'd often sit together and talk about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Oklahoma, about the cattle drives he'd worked, about his dreams for the ranch. She told him about her mother's boarding house, about the books she'd loved as a girl, about her hopes for Lily's future. Slowly, carefully, they were building something. Caroline didn't have a name for it yet, but she felt it growing between them like a plant reaching towards sunlight. One evening in late September, as the air finally began to cool from summer's brutal heat, Colt asked Caroline to join him for a walk after dinner. They left Lily sleeping peacefully and wandered out toward the creek that marked the eastern boundary of his property. I've been doing some thinking, Colt said as they walked, about the situation with the town. Caroline's stomach dropped. If you've changed your mind about me staying, that's not what I'm saying, Colt interrupted quickly. Let me finish. He stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious. The problem is that people see you as someone taking advantage of my hospitality. They think you're using me or that I'm being foolish or worse. I know, Caroline said miserably. So what if we took away their ammunition? Colt continued. What if we made it clear that you're not here out of desperation, but because you chose to be? That you're not some charity case, but a valued partner? Caroline frowned. How would we do that? Colt took a deep breath. We could get married. The words hung in the air between them, shocking and impossible. Caroline stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Hear me out, Colt said quickly. I'm not talking about a real marriage, not in the way marriages usually work. I'm talking about a legal arrangement that protects you and Lily. If we're married, people have to respect you. They can't call you names or treat you like you don't belong. And Lily would have a father, at least on paper. She'd have legitimacy, protection, a future. Caroline's mind reeled. That's insane. You can't just marry someone to solve a gossip problem. Why not? Colt challenged. People marry for money, for property, for social standing all the time. Why can't I marry someone to give her the protection she deserves? Because it's not fair to you, Caroline said. You'd be trapping yourself in a loveless marriage just to help me. Colt's expression softened. Who says it would be loveless? Caroline's breath caught. Colt? I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Colt said quickly. I'm not expecting... we could have separate rooms, separate lives if that's what you want. But Caroline, I care about you. I care about Lily. And if marrying you means I can protect you both from the Constance Hartwells of the world, then I want to do it. Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks again, but these were different. You barely know me. I know enough, Colt said. I know you're brave and hardworking and one of the best people I've ever met. I know you make my house feel like a home. I know that when I come in after a long day and see you at the stove or hear you singing to Lily, I feel something I've never felt before. He took her hands. I'm not asking you to love me, Caroline. I'm just asking you to let me take care of you and Lily the way you both deserve. Caroline looked up at this man who'd shown her nothing but kindness, who'd taken her in when she had nothing, who'd defended her against a cruel world without asking for anything in return. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this lifeline with both hands, but another part was terrified. "I need to think about it," she whispered. "Take all the time you need," Colt said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Caroline spent the next 3 days in turmoil. She weighed the practical benefits: legitimacy for Lily, protection from gossip, security she'd never known. But she also thought about what marriage meant, about the vows she'd be taking, about binding herself to a man she'd known for barely 2 months. Yet, every time doubt crept in, she remembered Constance Hartwell's cruelty. She thought about Lily growing up under the shadow of shame, branded as illegitimate, denied opportunities because of circumstances beyond her control. She thought about constantly running, always looking over her shoulder, never finding a place to belong. And she thought about Colt, about his steady kindness, his quiet strength, the way he looked at Lily with genuine affection, about the way her heart had started to beat faster when she heard his footsteps on the porch, about the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement could become something real. On the 4th morning, she found him in the barn, mucking out stalls. He looked up when she entered, his expression cautious and hopeful. "I have conditions," Caroline said without preamble. Colt straightened, leaning on his pitchfork. "I'm listening." "We keep separate rooms," Caroline said. "And you don't expect anything from me that I'm not ready to give." "Agreed," Colt said immediately. "I want to keep working, keep earning my way. I won't be a burden." "You've never been a burden," Colt said, "but agreed." Caroline took a shaky breath. "And if someday you meet someone you actually want to marry, someone you love, you tell me, and we figure out how to end this without it destroying both our lives." Colt crossed the distance between them. "Caroline, I'm not looking for anyone else. But if that's what you need to hear to feel safe, then yes, I agree." Caroline met his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt or deception. She found only honesty and patience. "Then yes," she said quietly. "I'll marry you." Colt's face broke into a smile that transformed him. "You will?" "I will," Caroline said, and suddenly found herself being lifted off her feet in a gentle embrace. Colt caught himself and set her down quickly, his face flushing. "Sorry, I'm happy. This is good. This is real good." Caroline laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "When do you want to do this?" "As soon as possible," Colt said, "before you change your mind." "I won't change my mind," Caroline said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. They were married 3 days later in the courthouse in Willow Bend, with Jake Brennan and the county clerk as witnesses. Caroline wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she'd mended and pressed until it looked almost new. Colt wore a clean shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed, his hands scrubbed clean of ranch work. The ceremony was brief and practical. The judge, an older man with kind eyes, spoke the traditional vows, and Caroline repeated them in a voice that shook only slightly. When Colt slipped a simple gold band on her finger, his mother's ring, he'd told her quietly. She felt the weight of it like a promise. "You may kiss the bride," the judge said, and Colt looked at Caroline with a question in his eyes. She nodded, just barely, and he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, nothing more. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey," the judge said warmly. "May you have a long and happy life together." As they left the courthouse, Caroline saw Constance Hartwell standing across the street, her face a mask of shock and fury. Caroline met her gaze evenly, lifted her chin, and took Colt's offered arm. They walked to the wagon together, husband and wife, and drove back to the ranch that was now legally their shared home. That night, after Lily was asleep, Caroline and Colt sat on the porch as they had so many times before. But everything felt different now. Caroline twisted the ring on her finger, marveling at how her life had changed in just 2 months. "You all right?" Colt asked softly. "I think so," Caroline said. "It's strange. Being married, being protected." "You'll get used to it," Colt said. "And Caroline?" She looked at him. "Yes?" "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting me enough to do this." Caroline felt emotion swell in her chest. "Thank you for asking." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I don't think this is going to be as loveless as I thought." Colt's eyes widened slightly. No? No, Caroline said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think maybe it already isn't. Colt reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining in the darkness. They sat together under the vast Texas sky. Two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new. And for the first time since stepping off that train, Caroline Mercer, now Caroline Ramsey, believed that maybe, just maybe, her story was going to have a happy ending after all. The morning after their wedding, Caroline woke to find sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of something burning drifting from the kitchen. She threw on her robe and hurried out to find Colt standing over the stove, staring helplessly at a pan of what might have once been eggs but now resembled charcoal. I wanted to make you breakfast, he said sheepishly, as a wedding morning gesture. Caroline couldn't help but laugh. That's very sweet, but maybe we should stick to our usual arrangement. Probably wise, Colt agreed, scraping the ruined eggs into the slop bucket. I forgot how bad I am at this. They fell into their morning routine as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Caroline found herself hyper-aware of Colt's presence, the way he moved through the kitchen, the sound of his voice when he spoke to Lily, the brief moments when their hands accidentally touched while passing plates. She wore his mother's ring on her finger, and every time she caught sight of it, her heart did a strange little flip. True to his word, Colt maintained respectful distance. He still slept in his own room, still knocked before entering any space she occupied, still treated her with the careful courtesy he'd shown from the beginning. But there was something new in his eyes when he looked at her, something warm and hopeful that made Caroline's breath catch. Their first real test came the following Sunday when Colt suggested they attend church together. Caroline's stomach twisted with anxiety at the thought of facing the townspeople as Mrs. Ramsey, but Colt was insistent. We're married now, he said firmly. We've got nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Besides, the sooner people see us as a family, the sooner they'll stop wagging their tongues. So Caroline dressed herself and Lily in their best clothes, and they rode into Willow Bend together. The church was a simple white building at the edge of town, its bell tower rising against the clear autumn sky. As they pulled up, Caroline saw people gathering on the steps, their conversations dying away as they caught sight of the Ramsey wagon. Colt helped Caroline down, then took Lily from her arms with easy confidence. He offered Caroline his free arm, and together they walked toward the church entrance. Caroline kept her spine straight and her gaze forward, refusing to acknowledge the whispers that followed them like smoke. Inside, they found a pew near the back. The service began and Caroline tried to focus on the hymns and the sermon, but she felt the weight of every stare, heard the rustle of turning heads. When the pastor asked for the congregation to welcome newcomers and celebrate recent marriages, Colt stood and announced clearly that he and Caroline had wed the previous week. My wife and I are grateful for this community, Colt said, his voice carrying through the church, and we look forward to being part of it for many years to come. The polite applause that followed was thin and scattered, but Caroline appreciated Colt's boldness. He was claiming her publicly, making it clear that she wasn't something to hide or apologize for. When he sat back down, he reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture of solidarity that gave her courage. After the service, as people filtered out into the sunshine, several approached them. Some were genuinely kind. An elderly couple congratulated them warmly. A young mother complimented Lily's dress. But others were coolly polite at best, their smiles not reaching their eyes. And Constance Hartwell swept past them without a word, her purple skirt swishing in pointed dismissal. That went better than I expected, Colt said as they drove home. Did it? Caroline asked. Most people looked like they'd swallowed lemons. Most people always look like that after church, Colt said with a grin. But some were friendly. That's a start. He glanced at her. Give it time, Caroline. They'll come around. Caroline wanted to believe him, but she'd learned not to trust in people's capacity for change. Still, she nodded and tried to push her doubts aside. She was Mrs. Ramsey now. She had legal protection, social standing, a name that meant something in this county. That had to count for something. The next few weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm of contentment. Caroline discovered that marriage to Colt wasn't the burden she'd feared, but rather a partnership that made daily life easier and more pleasant. He fixed things without being asked, helped with Lily when Caroline needed both hands for cooking, and always made sure she had everything she needed when he went to town. In return, Caroline kept the house running smoothly, managed their modest finances, and created a home that felt warm and welcoming. But beneath the domestic peace, Caroline felt something growing between them that was harder to name. She caught herself watching Colt when he didn't know she was looking, the way his shoulders moved when he worked, the gentleness in his hands when he played with Lily, the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face. And sometimes she caught him watching her too, his gaze soft and thoughtful before he'd quickly look away. One evening in late October, after Lily had gone to bed, Caroline found Colt on the porch, whittling a small wooden horse. She brought him coffee and sat beside him, closer than she usually dared. "That's beautiful," she said, watching his skilled hands shape the wood. "It's for Lily," Colt said. "Thought she might like a toy to play with." Caroline's throat tightened. "You're good to her. To us both." Colt set down his knife and turned to face her. "Caroline, I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way." Caroline's heart began to race. "All right. I know we got married for practical reasons," Colt continued, "to protect you and Lily, to quiet the gossips, to make things easier. And I meant what I said about not expecting anything from you. But I also need you to know that somewhere along the way that this stopped being just an arrangement for me." He took a breath. "I've fallen in love with you, Caroline. With you and with Lily. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear, and it doesn't change our agreement, but I couldn't keep pretending I don't feel it." Caroline stared at him, her mind reeling. She'd suspected something was growing between them, but hearing him say it out loud made it real and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Colt, You don't have to say anything," he interrupted quickly. "I just needed you to know, whatever happens, whatever you decide you want from this marriage, I'm here. I'm committed. I'm not going anywhere." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've been hurt before. I've trusted before, and it destroyed me. I don't know if I can—" "I'm not him," Colt said quietly but firmly. "I'm not Robert Tenley or Lily's father or anyone else who failed you. I'm just a rancher who got lucky enough to meet a woman who makes him want to be better every single day." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Take all the time you need, Caroline. I'll still be here." That night, lying alone in her bed, Caroline turned Colt's words over in her mind. She thought about the kind of man he was. Steady, honest, patient. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how Lily lit up when he walked through the door, how the ranch had become more than just shelter, but a real home. And she thought about her own heart, which had been locked away for so long but was now beating faster whenever Colt was near. Maybe, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, maybe she could trust again. Maybe not all men were liars and cowards. Maybe Colt Ramsey was exactly who he appeared to be, a good man offering real love without conditions or tricks. The next morning, Caroline woke with a sense of purpose. She made breakfast as usual, but when Colt came in from his morning chores, she stopped him at the door. "I need to tell you something too," she said. "About Lily's father." Colt's expression grew serious. "You don't have to—" "I do," Caroline said. "If we're going to move forward, you need to know the whole truth." She took a breath. His name was Thomas Winters. He was a salesman who came through town regularly. He was charming and attentive, and I was young and stupid enough to believe every word he said. He told me he was single, that he loved me, that we'd be married as soon as he made enough money. I gave him everything, my heart, my body, my trust, and then I got pregnant. Colt listened without interruption, his jaw tight, but his eyes compassionate. "When I told him about the baby, he laughed," Caroline continued, the memory still sharp as broken glass. "He said I was a fool if I'd believed any of it. He had a wife in St. Louis and 3 children. I was just entertainment when he was on the road." She wrapped her arms around herself. "My family disowned me when they found out. The women in town made sure I couldn't find work anywhere. I lost my mother's boarding house because I couldn't pay the mortgage. I had nothing left but shame and a baby I didn't know how to provide for." "And that's when Tenley came along," Colt said quietly. "Yes. He'd stayed at the boarding house several times. He seemed kind, and when he wrote saying he'd moved to Texas and wanted a wife, I thought God was giving me a second chance, I thought I could give Lily a father and a respectable life. Caroline laughed bitterly. Instead, I just proved what a terrible judge of character I am. Colt crossed to her and took her hands. You're not a terrible judge of character. You're someone who wanted to believe the best in people. That's not a flaw, Caroline. That's hope. And the men who took advantage of that hope are the ones who should be ashamed, not you. How can you say that? Caroline asked, tears spilling over. How can you look at me knowing what I've done and still want me? Because what you've done is survive, Colt said intensely. You've taken every blow life dealt you and kept standing. You've protected your daughter and given her love even when the world tried to crush you both. You've worked harder than anyone I know and never once asked for more than you earned. That's not someone to be ashamed of, Caroline. That's someone to admire. Caroline broke then, the walls she'd built around her heart finally crumbling. She collapsed into Colt's arms, sobbing against his chest while he held her and murmured words of comfort. All the pain, fear, and shame she'd carried for so long poured out of her, and Colt absorbed it all without flinching. When her tears finally subsided, Caroline pulled back slightly and looked up at him. His shirt was damp with her tears, his eyes were bright with emotion, and in that moment, Caroline knew with absolute certainty that she was safe with this man. Truly, completely safe. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered, and it terrifies me. Colt's smile was brilliant. Then we'll be terrified together. He cupped her face gently. Can I kiss you? A real kiss this time? Caroline nodded, her heart pounding. Colt leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. It was gentle and sweet, and nothing like the demanding kisses Thomas Winters had forced on her. This was a question, not a demand, a gift, not a taking. Caroline found herself kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, years of loneliness and fear melting away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day I met you, he admitted. You should have, Caroline said, surprising herself with her boldness. I wanted you to be ready, Colt said. I wanted you to choose me, not just accept me because you had no other options. I choose you, Caroline said firmly. I choose this. I choose us. The kiss that followed was deeper, more urgent, and filled with all the emotions they'd both been holding back. When Lily's cry broke through from the bedroom, they pulled apart reluctantly, both smiling. We should probably, Caroline began. Yeah, Colt agreed, but he stole one more quick kiss before releasing her. To be continued? Definitely, Caroline said, her cheeks flushed and her heart soaring. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of joy. Caroline and Colt moved through their routines with an added layer of affection, his hand finding the small of her back as he passed, her fingers brushing his when she handed him his coffee, stolen kisses in quiet moments when Lily was napping. It felt like being young again, like discovering something precious and new. But happiness, Caroline had learned, was often followed by trouble. The trouble arrived on a cold November morning in the form of a telegram. Colt had gone to town for supplies and returned with his face pale and his jaw set. He handed Caroline the telegram without a word. It was from a lawyer in Missouri. Thomas Winters had died in a carriage accident, and in settling his estate, they discovered he'd left a small property to Caroline, the boarding house she'd lost, which he'd apparently purchased through some legal maneuvering. The property was now legally hers, along with a modest sum of money. Caroline read the telegram 3 times, unable to process what it meant. How did he even know where to find me? Probably had someone tracking you, Colt said, his voice tight. Maybe felt guilty in the end. He's dead? Caroline said, still trying to absorb it. Thomas is dead? Seems that way, Colt said. He sat down heavily at the table. This changes things, doesn't it? Caroline looked at him sharply. What do you mean? You have property now, money. You don't need me anymore. Colt's voice was carefully neutral, but Caroline could see the fear in his eyes. You could go back to Missouri, start fresh where people know you, rebuild the boarding house, give Lily a real home, not just a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Caroline set the telegram down and crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. This is a real home, Colt. This is where I belong, with you. But you have options now, Colt pressed. You're not trapped here. If you want to leave, I don't want to leave, Caroline said firmly. I don't want the boarding house or Missouri or any of it. I want you. I want this life we're building. The only question is, do you still want me now that I'm not dependent on you? Colt's eyes widened. You think that's why Caroline, no. God, no. I never wanted you to need me. I wanted you to choose me. That's completely different. Then I choose you, Caroline said. Again, I choose you every day, Colt Ramsey. I choose this ranch and this life and this marriage. The only thing that Telegram changes is that now I have something to contribute. We could use that money to improve the ranch, or save it for Lily's future, or... Colt pulled her down onto his lap and kissed her thoroughly. We'll figure it out together, he said when they broke apart. Everything together, from now on. Together, Caroline agreed, and sealed it with another kiss. But the telegram had stirred something in Caroline's mind. That night, after Lily was asleep and she and Colt were sitting together on the porch, much closer now, his arm around her shoulders, she brought up something that had been bothering her. Colt, I need to tell you something about what happened at the harvest dance last year. Colt tensed slightly. All right. I didn't just leave Missouri because of the shame, Caroline said quietly. There was a man there, one of Thomas's business associates. He found out about Lily, and he started making suggestions, offering money if I'd be accommodating to him. When I refused, he spread rumors that I was already selling myself, that I'd sleep with anyone for the right price. Colt's arm tightened around her. Caroline, that's why I was so desperate to leave, she continued, why I believed Robert Tenley so easily. I wasn't just running from shame. I was running from men who thought my situation made me available to them. She looked up at Colt. I need you to understand that when you offered me shelter, when you kept your distance and treated me with respect, it was the first time in over a year that a man had looked at me like I was a person instead of property. Colt was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm sorry any man made you feel that way. And I promise you, Caroline, I will spend the rest of my life proving that you're not just a person. You're the most important person in my world. Caroline felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears. I believe you, she whispered. For the first time in my life, I actually believe it. They sat together under the stars, two wounded souls who'd found each other and decided to heal together. And when Colt eventually walked Caroline to her door and kissed her goodnight, she found herself wishing he wouldn't leave, wishing their separate rooms could become one. But she wasn't quite ready for that yet. And Colt, being Colt, understood without her having to explain. He simply kissed her forehead and whispered, "Whenever you're ready, no rush." The next day brought unexpected visitors. Caroline was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. She shaded her eyes and saw two riders, one she recognized as Sheriff Tom Brennan, Jake's older brother, and another man she didn't know. Colt emerged from the barn, his expression wary. "Tom, what brings you out here?" "Official business, I'm afraid," Tom said, dismounting. He was a tall man with Jake's friendly features but a more serious demeanor. "This is Marshal Peters from Fort Worth. He needs to ask you some questions." The marshal was a hard-faced man with cold eyes. He looked at Caroline with obvious distaste. "You Caroline Mercer?" "Caroline Ramsey," Colt corrected sharply. "My wife." "Right," the marshal said, not sounding convinced. "Mrs. Ramsey, I need to ask you about a man named Thomas Winters." Caroline's blood went cold. "He's dead. I received a telegram." "That's right," the marshal said. "Died 3 weeks ago. Thing is, his widow's contesting the will, claims you manipulated her husband, extracted promises from him, maybe even forged documents giving you claim to property. She wants the bequest overturned and you investigated for fraud." Caroline felt the ground tilt beneath her. "That's insane. I didn't even know Thomas was married until after I was pregnant. I never asked him for anything. I didn't even know he'd bought the boarding house until yesterday." "Can you prove that?" the marshal asked. "Can his widow prove her accusations?" Colt interjected, stepping protectively in front of Caroline. "Because last I checked, in this country, people are innocent until proven guilty." "Just doing my job, Ramsey." the marshal said. Mrs. Winters has hired lawyers. They're building a case that your wife was Winters's mistress, that she extorted money from him, and that the property transfer was made under duress. I was not his mistress, Caroline said, her voice shaking with fury. I was his victim. He lied to me, used me, and abandoned me when I needed him most. If he left me that property, it was probably guilt, not manipulation. That'll be for the courts to decide, BC, the marshal said. In the meantime, I'm advising you not to leave the territory. We may need to question you further. She's not going anywhere, Colt said coldly. She's exactly where she belongs. After the lawmen left, Caroline collapsed into Colt's arms, shaking. It never ends, she sobbed. Even dead, Thomas finds a way to destroy my life. He's not destroying anything, Colt said fiercely. We'll fight this. We'll get a lawyer, prove you did nothing wrong. That widow can hire all the lawyers she wants. The truth is on our side. Is it? Caroline asked bitterly. What's the truth, Colt? That I was stupid enough to sleep with a married man? That I got pregnant outside of marriage? That I'm exactly the kind of woman people think I am? The truth, Colt said, gripping her shoulders and forcing her to meet his eyes, is that you were deceived by a liar. That you're a good mother and a good wife and a good person. And anyone who says different will answer to me. Caroline wanted to believe him, but fear had taken root in her heart. What if the widow won? What if Caroline lost everything again? What if her past finally destroyed the future she'd been trying to build? That night, Caroline couldn't sleep. She paced her room, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Around midnight, she heard a soft knock on her door. Caroline? You all right? Colt's voice, concerned. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway in his nightshirt, his hair mussed from sleep. I can't stop thinking about it, she admitted. What if they take me away? What if Lily ends up in an orphanage? What if... Hey, Colt said softly, stepping into her room. None of that's going to happen. I won't let it. You might not have a choice, Caroline said. Colt sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her down beside him. Then we'll face it together. Whatever happens, Caroline, you're not alone anymore. You've got me, you've got this ranch, you've got a life here. And I will fight with everything I have to protect it. Caroline leaned her head on his shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together. Eventually, Caroline's breathing evened out and her eyes grew heavy. Stay, she whispered. Please, just for tonight. I don't want to be alone. Colt hesitated. Caroline, I don't want you to think... I'm not asking for anything except your presence, Caroline said. I just need to know you're here. Colt nodded and lay down beside her, on top of the covers while she slipped beneath them. He took her hand and held it through the fabric, and Caroline finally felt safe enough to close her eyes. She drifted off to sleep with Colt's steady breathing beside her and the knowledge that whatever storms were coming, she wouldn't have to weather them alone. Caroline woke to find pale morning light filtering through her window and Colt's face inches from hers, his hand still holding hers through the blanket. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender, it made her chest ache. Morning, he said softly. You stayed all night, Caroline whispered. I promised I would, Colt said. I don't break my promises. Before Caroline could respond, Lily's morning babble drifted from her cradle. Colt released Caroline's hand and stood, crossing to lift the baby with easy affection. Good morning, little one. Ready to start the day? Lily grabbed his nose and laughed, and Caroline felt something shift inside her. This man who'd started as a stranger had become her husband, her partner, and now, watching him cuddle her daughter with such natural love, she realized he'd become her family in the truest sense of the word. Over breakfast, Colt laid out a plan. We need a lawyer, a good one. I'm thinking we ride to Fort Worth, find someone who specializes in estate law, and get ahead of whatever Mrs. Winters is planning. That'll be expensive, Caroline said. Though the telegram had mentioned money left to her, she had no idea when or if she'd actually receive it. We'll figure it out, Colt said firmly. The ranch is doing well. We've got savings, and if we need more, we can sell some cattle early. He reached across the table and took her hand. This is worth fighting for, Caroline. You're worth fighting for. They made the trip to Fort Worth 3 days later, leaving Lily with Jake's wife Emma, a kind woman who'd warmed to Caroline despite the town's general coldness. The journey took most of a day, and Caroline found herself grateful for the time alone with Colt. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. With each mile, Caroline felt the bond between them growing stronger. Fort Worth was bigger and busier than Willow Bend, full of cattle buyers, railroad men, and opportunists looking to make their fortune. Colt led Caroline to a brick building on Main Street where a sign read Henderson and Associates, Attorneys at Law. The lawyer they met with was a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Henderson, who listened to Caroline's story without interruption. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Mrs. Winters has no case," he said bluntly. "From what you've described, you were the victim of fraud and abandonment. The property transfer was Winters' attempt to make amends, and it's legally binding. However, Mrs. Winters can make things difficult and expensive. She's likely hoping you'll settle rather than fight." "We're fighting," Colt said immediately. "Good," Henderson said. "Then here's what we'll do. I'll file a response to her complaint, detailing the timeline of events and Winters' deception. We'll subpoena records showing he purchased the boarding house without your knowledge, and we'll get testimony from people in Missouri who can verify that you were abandoned and destitute." He looked at Caroline. "It won't be pleasant. Your private life will become public record. Are you prepared for that?" Caroline thought of Lily, of the future she wanted to build, of Colt sitting beside her ready to fight. "Yes," she said. "I'm prepared." Henderson nodded approvingly. "Then we'll win this. It'll take time and money, but we'll win." The ride back to the ranch was quieter. Caroline felt drained from reliving her past, from laying bare all her shame and mistakes to a stranger. But Colt's presence beside her was a comfort, his occasional touches to her hand a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. "You were brave today," Colt said as the sun began to set, telling him everything like that. "I didn't feel brave," Caroline admitted. "I felt exposed." "Same thing sometimes," Colt said. "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." Caroline looked at him, this man who'd shown her what real strength looked like. Not the false bravado of men like Thomas Winters, but the quiet courage of someone who faced hard things without flinching. "When did you get so wise?" she asked. Colt grinned. "Must be the company I keep." They reached the ranch after dark to find Emma waiting with a sleeping Lily. "She was an angel," Emma reported. "Ate well, played hard, went down without a fuss." She hesitated, then added, "Caroline, I wanted to say, I know some folks in town have been unkind, but not everyone feels that way. There are people who admire what you're doing, how you're building a life for your daughter. I'm one of them." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know." After Emma left, Caroline and Colt put Lily to bed together. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. Two parents caring for their child, a family unit complete and whole. When Lily was settled, they returned to the kitchen where Caroline poured coffee, and they sat at the table like they'd done so many times before. "I've been thinking," Colt said slowly, "about the money from Winters' estate. If we do get it, I think we should use it to expand the ranch." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Expand how?" "I want to build a proper house," Colt said. "Not this tiny cabin. A real house with separate bedrooms for the children we might have someday. A proper kitchen, maybe even a parlor for entertaining." He met her eyes. "I want to build something permanent, Caroline. Something that says we're here to stay, that we're a real family." "Children we might have?" Caroline repeated, her heart hammering. Colt's ears turned red. "I mean, only if you want. I know we haven't, that we're still. I'm not trying to pressure you." Caroline reached across the table and took his hand. "I want that," she said softly. "All of it. The house, the family, the future. I want it with you, Colt." Colt's smile was brilliant. "Yeah?" "Yeah," Caroline confirmed. She took a breath. "In fact, I've been thinking maybe it's time we stop sleeping in separate rooms." Colt went very still. "Caroline, are you sure? Because I don't want you to feel like you have to." "I don't feel like I have to," Caroline interrupted. "I want to. You've been patient and kind and respectful, and I love you for it. But I'm ready now, Colt. I'm ready to be your wife in every way. Colt stood and crossed to her, pulling her up and into his arms. I love you, he said against her hair. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, Caroline whispered. You saved me, Colt. You and this ranch, and this life. You saved me. No, Colt said, pulling back to look at her. You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to land. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Caroline didn't sleep alone. She and Colt came together with tenderness and care, and Caroline discovered that physical intimacy could be beautiful when it was given freely instead of taken. In Colt's arms, she felt cherished and safe, and when she finally fell asleep curled against his chest, she knew she'd made the right choice. The next few weeks passed in a haze of happiness despite the legal battle looming over them. Caroline and Colt grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building the kind of partnership that came from genuine love and mutual respect. Lily was thriving too, taking her first wobbling steps and babbling words that almost sounded like mama and dada. But peace, Caroline was learning, was always temporary. The trouble came on a cold December morning when Marshal Peters returned, this time with 2 deputies and an official-looking document. Caroline's stomach dropped when she saw them riding up the lane. Colt met them outside, his posture protective. Marshal, what's this about? Got a court order, Peters said, handing over the document. Mrs. Winters has filed additional charges. She's claiming Caroline Ramsey coerced her husband, possibly used witchcraft or other manipulation, and that the child Lily is evidence of an ongoing illicit relationship. That's insane, Caroline said, emerging from the house with Lily on her hip. Thomas died weeks ago. How could we have an ongoing relationship? She's saying it went on for years, Peters said. That you followed him around, trapped him, refused to leave him alone. She's got letters she claims prove it. Forged letters, Colt said coldly. Because Caroline has never written to Winters. Not once. That's for the court to decide, Peters said. In the meantime, I'm authorized to take Mrs. Ramsey into custody pending a hearing. Like hell you are, Colt said, stepping in front of Caroline. You're not taking her anywhere without proof of wrongdoing. I've got a court order. From a judge in Missouri who's never met her, Colt interrupted. This is Texas. You want to arrest my wife, you get a Texas judge to sign off on it. Peter's jaw tightened. You're obstructing justice, Ramsey. I'm protecting my family, Colt corrected. Now get off my property before I'm forced to defend it. The standoff lasted several tense moments before Peters finally remounted his horse. This isn't over. We'll be back with proper authorization. After they left, Caroline sank onto the porch steps, her legs suddenly weak. Colt sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. They're going to arrest me, Caroline whispered. They're going to take me away, and Lily will end up in an orphanage, and everything we've built will be destroyed. No, Colt said firmly. That's not going to happen. We're going to fight this with everything we have. How? Caroline asked desperately. She's rich. She's got lawyers. And she's playing on every prejudice people have about women like me. How do we fight that? With the truth, Colt said, and with people who know you and can vouch for your character. He stood and helped her up. Come on, we've got work to do. Over the next 2 days, Colt rode through the county gathering support. He went to neighbors, to people he'd done business with, to anyone who might be willing to testify on Caroline's behalf. Jake and Emma immediately volunteered. So did Tom Brennan, the sheriff, who'd grown to respect Caroline's quiet dignity. Even some of the women from church, the ones who'd been kind after the wedding, agreed to speak for her. But it wasn't enough. They needed something more, something that would definitively prove Mrs. Winters was lying. And that's when Caroline remembered the letters. Colt, she said on the 3rd evening, her voice urgent. I kept his letters, the ones Thomas sent me when he was courting me. They're in my carpet bag, packed away with my mother's things. Colt's eyes lit up. The ones where he claimed to be single? Yes, Caroline said. He wrote about his future plans, about wanting a wife, about being lonely on the road. He never once mentioned being married. That's it, Colt said. That's what we need. Those letters prove he deceived you, that you had no knowledge of his marriage. Caroline retrieved the carpet bag from the back of her wardrobe and pulled out a small bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. She'd kept them as proof that someone had once wanted her, that her love hadn't been entirely foolish. Now they might save her life. They rode to Fort Worth the next morning, leaving Lily with Emma again. Henderson read through the letters with growing satisfaction. "These are perfect," he said. "They establish a pattern of deception. Look at this one. He explicitly says he's never been married, and this one talks about our future together in terms that make it clear he's promising matrimony." He looked up at Caroline. "Mrs. Ramsey, these letters could destroy Mrs. Winters's entire case." "Then use them," Caroline said. "Please." Henderson filed them with the court that afternoon, along with affidavits from Caroline's character witnesses. The response was swift. 2 days later, they received word that Mrs. Winters' lawyers wanted to negotiate a settlement. "They know they can't win," Henderson explained when Caroline and Colt met with him again. "Those letters prove Winters defrauded you. If this goes to trial, Mrs. Winters looks complicit in her husband's deception. She's offering to drop all charges and withdraw her contest of the will if you agree not to pursue damages against the Winters estate." "What does that mean for us?" Colt asked. "It means you keep the boarding house and the money," Henderson said, "and Mrs. Winters slinks back to Missouri with her reputation intact." Caroline thought about it. Part of her wanted to fight, to make Mrs. Winters pay for the pain and fear she'd caused. But another part just wanted it to be over, to return to the quiet life she'd been building with Colt. "I'll accept the settlement," Caroline said finally. "I don't want her money or her property beyond what Thomas left me. I just want to be free of all of them." "Wise choice," Henderson said. "I'll draw up the papers." The settlement was finalized a week later. Caroline signed the documents with a hand that shook only slightly, watched Henderson file them with the court, and walked out of the courthouse feeling like she'd shed 100-pound weight. "It's over," she said to Colt as they stood on the courthouse steps. "It's really over." "It's over," Colt confirmed, pulling her into his arms right there in public. "You're free, Caroline, free and clear." Caroline buried her face in his chest and let the tears come. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion. She'd survived. Against all odds, despite every obstacle thrown in her path, she'd survived. And more than that, she'd built something worth fighting for. The ride home was jubilant. They stopped at a general store and bought candy sticks for Lily, a new shirt for Colt, and fabric for a new dress for Caroline. They were celebrating, and it felt earned. When they reached the ranch, Emma was waiting with Lily and with news. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression uncertain. "A woman from town. She's been waiting for over an hour." Caroline's good mood evaporated. "Who?" "Me," said a voice from the porch. Caroline turned to see Constance Hartwell standing there, her elaborate purple dress looking out of place against the rough wood of the ranch house. Colt immediately stepped forward. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you've come to cause more trouble—" "I haven't," Constance interrupted. Her voice was different, smaller than Caroline remembered. "I came to apologize." Caroline stared at her. "Apologize?" Constance descended the porch steps slowly. Up close, Caroline could see the strain in her face, the shadows under her eyes. "I heard about Mrs. Winters's accusations, about how she tried to destroy you with lies." She looked down at her hands. "It made me think about what I said to you that day in town, the cruelty I showed you." "You called my daughter a bastard," Caroline said flatly. "I did," Constance said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "And I was wrong. I was cruel and judgmental and everything my faith teaches me not to be." She took a shaky breath. "The truth is, Mrs. Ramsey, I envied you." Caroline blinked. "You envied me?" "My husband controls every aspect of my life," Constance said quietly. "What I wear, who I speak to, how I spend my days. I have no freedom, no choices, no voice of my own. And then you arrived, a woman who'd been knocked down by life but kept getting back up, who made her own choices even when they were hard, who built a life on her own terms. I envied that strength, and instead of admiring it, I tried to tear you down." Caroline didn't know what to say. She looked at Colt, who seemed equally surprised. "I don't expect forgiveness," Constance continued. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. and that if there's anything I can do to make amends, to help restore your reputation in town, I'll do it. Caroline studied the woman before her, seeing past the fancy dress and haughty manner to someone who was, in her own way, as trapped as Caroline had once been. You can start by treating other women with kindness instead of judgment, Caroline said finally. No matter their circumstances or their past. Constance nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I will. I promise I will. After Constance left, Caroline turned to Colt. Did that really just happen? I think it did, Colt said, still looking stunned. I think you just earned the respect of the meanest woman in Willow Bend. I think maybe she's not as mean as we thought, Caroline said thoughtfully. Just unhappy. That night, after Lily was asleep and Caroline and Colt were lying in bed together, Caroline found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. In just a few months, she'd gone from abandoned and alone to married and loved. From facing criminal charges to being vindicated, from being the town outcast to earning respect even from her harshest critic. What are you thinking about? Colt asked, running his fingers through her hair. How much has changed, Caroline said. How different my life is now than it was when I stepped off that train. Better? Colt asked, a smile in his voice. So much better, Caroline confirmed. She turned to look at him. Colt, I want to sell the boarding house. I don't want to keep anything that connects me to Thomas Winters or that life. I want to use the money to build that house you talked about, the one with room for more children. You sure? Colt asked. That boarding house is your inheritance, your security. You're my security, Caroline said. This ranch, this family, this life, that's my inheritance. That's what I want to build on. Colt's expression softened. Then that's what we'll do. He pulled her closer. We'll build the biggest, finest ranch house Willow Bend has ever seen, and we'll fill it with children and laughter and love. Promise? Caroline asked. Promise, Colt said, sealing it with a kiss. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Caroline was in the kitchen when she heard a wagon pull up. She looked out to see a young woman holding a baby, her dress worn and her face desperate. Colt was already approaching from the barn. Can I help you, ma'am? He called. The woman climbed down from the wagon, clutching her baby. I'm looking for Caroline Ramsey. I heard she helps women who have nowhere else to go. Caroline stepped out onto the porch, her heart clenching with recognition. She saw herself in this woman, the fear, the shame, the desperate hope that someone, somewhere would be kind. I'm Caroline Ramsey, she said gently. Come inside. You're safe now. As the woman followed her into the house, Caroline caught Colt's eye. He smiled at her, and in that smile, Caroline saw approval and love and pride. She'd been saved by kindness, and now she had the chance to extend that same kindness to someone else. It was, she realized, exactly what she was meant to do. The young woman's name was Sarah Mitchell, and her story was achingly familiar. She'd been promised marriage by a traveling merchant who disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. Her family had disowned her, and she'd been living in a boarding house in Fort Worth until the owner discovered her situation and threw her out. She'd heard from someone at the general store that Caroline Ramsey had once been in similar circumstances and might understand. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, Caroline said, settling Sarah at the kitchen table with tea and bread. I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I can work. I can earn my keep. I just need somewhere safe for me and Thomas. She looked down at her baby, a tiny boy with dark hair and solemn eyes. I named him after his father. Stupid, I know. Not stupid, Caroline said gently. Hopeful. There's a difference. She glanced at Colt, who'd followed them inside. We have that empty bunkhouse. Sarah could stay there, help me with the household work until she gets back on her feet. Colt nodded immediately. I'll clean it out today, make it livable. We'll get you settled, Miss Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell, Sarah said quietly. I tell people I'm a widow. It's easier than the truth. You don't have to lie here, Caroline said. We know the truth, and we're not judging you for it. Sarah broke down then, sobbing into her hands while baby Thomas whimpered in confusion. Caroline handed Lily to Colt and wrapped her arms around the weeping woman, remembering how it felt to be so alone and afraid. She remembered standing on that train platform, remembered the cruel whispers, remembered thinking she had nowhere left to turn. and she remembered Colt stepping out of the dust to offer help without judgment. Over the next few days, Sarah settled into the bunkhouse, which Colt transformed into a cozy space with a real bed, a rocking chair, and a small stove for heat. Caroline helped her organize her meager belongings and showed her the rhythms of ranch life. Sarah proved to be a hard worker, grateful for every kindness and eager to earn her place. But her presence stirred something in Caroline's mind, something that had been growing since Constance Hartwell's apology. That evening, after both babies were asleep and Sarah had retired to the bunkhouse, Caroline broached the subject with Colt. "I've been thinking about the boarding house in Missouri," she said as they sat together on the porch. "About selling it." "We talked about that," Colt said, "using the money to build our house." "What if we did something else?" Caroline said slowly. "What if instead of selling it, we turned it into a place like this? A refuge for women who have nowhere to go, women like Sarah and like I was. We could hire someone to run it, provide shelter and safety until they can get back on their feet." Colt was quiet for a moment, considering. "That would be expensive and complicated to manage from Texas." "I know," Caroline said. "But Colt, when Sarah showed up yesterday, I saw myself. I saw what my life would have been if you hadn't helped me. And I keep thinking about how many other women are out there desperate and alone, one bad decision away from complete ruin." She turned to face him. "We have the means to help, shouldn't we?" Colt's expression softened. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met." He took her hand. "If this is what you want to do, then we'll do it. We'll find someone trustworthy to run the boarding house, set up a fund to support it, and help as many women as we can. We can still build our house too," Caroline added quickly. "We don't have to choose between them." "No," Colt agreed. "We'll do both. Build something beautiful here and extend that same hope back in Missouri." Caroline kissed him, grateful beyond words for this man who never questioned her dreams, but instead helped her build them. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Colt said. "Now come on, let's go to bed. Morning comes early, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us." The weeks that followed were busy with planning and preparation. Caroline wrote to her former landlady in Missouri, a kind woman named Mrs. Peterson who'd tried to help during Caroline's darkest days. She explained her vision for turning the boarding house into a refuge and asked if Mrs. Peterson would be willing to manage it. The response came 3 weeks later, enthusiastic and grateful. Mrs. Peterson had been looking for meaningful work, and the idea of helping women in crisis resonated deeply with her. Meanwhile, Colt began construction on the new house. He hired a crew from Fort Worth, and soon the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as the structure took shape. It was going to be magnificent. 2 stories with 6 bedrooms, a parlor, a dining room, and a kitchen twice the size of their current one. Caroline spent hours poring over plans, choosing details, imagining the life they'd live within those walls. But the most significant change came in February when Caroline discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was certain. When Doc Harris confirmed it during his monthly visit to check on a ranch hand's broken arm, Caroline felt a mixture of joy and terror. She told Colt that evening as they walked along the creek. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply. Colt stopped walking and turned to her, his face cycling through shock, wonder, and pure elation. "A baby? Our baby?" "Yes," Caroline said, tears streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Colt swept her up in his arms, spinning her around before carefully setting her down. "Caroline, I'm more than happy. I don't even have words. We're going to have a baby." "Another baby," Caroline corrected, thinking of Lily. "You already have one." Colt's expression grew serious. "I want to adopt Lily, legally, make her mine in every way that matters. Would you be all right with that?" Caroline's throat tightened with emotion. "You really want to?" "I've wanted to since the day I met her," Colt said. "She's my daughter in every way that counts. I just want the law to recognize it too." They made the arrangements the following week. Henderson drew up the adoption papers, and a judge in Fort Worth approved them with barely a glance. Lily Mercer became Lily Ramsey, with Colt's name on her birth certificate where her father should have been. When Caroline held the official documents, She wept with gratitude for this man who'd claimed her daughter as his own without hesitation. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new life. The house was nearly complete, its fresh lumber gleaming in the sun. Sarah had found work in town as a seamstress and was preparing to move into rooms above the shop. No longer a charity case, but a woman rebuilding her life with dignity. The boarding house in Missouri was operating under Mrs. Peterson's capable management, already sheltering 3 women who'd found themselves desperate and alone. And Caroline, her belly beginning to swell with new life, felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible. She was standing on the porch of their new house one May afternoon, running her hand along the smooth railing when she heard hooves approaching. She turned to see a familiar wagon, Emma Brennan, with several other women from town. "Caroline," Emma called, climbing down. "We heard about the new house and wanted to bring you some things. Housewarming gifts." Caroline descended the porch steps, surprised to see not just Emma but 5 other women, including 2 who'd been cold to her after she first arrived. They carried baskets of preserves, fresh-baked bread, quilts, and other household items. "This is incredibly kind," Caroline said, overwhelmed. "It's deserved," Emma said firmly. "Caroline, we owe you an apology. Some of us were quick to judge, slow to show Christian charity, but watching how you've conducted yourself, how you've built a life here, how you're even helping other women now, it's inspired us. You've shown us what real strength looks like." One of the other women, an older lady named Mrs. Thornton, stepped forward. "My granddaughter found herself in trouble last month. Pregnant, abandoned by the father. I was going to send her away in shame, but then I remembered what you'd survived. I talked to my son, and we've decided to help her keep the baby, raise it with love instead of shame. You showed us there's another way." Caroline felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I never meant to inspire anyone. I was just trying to survive." "That's exactly why it matters," Emma said. "You didn't just survive, Caroline. You built something beautiful out of tragedy, and that gives hope to all of us." After the women left, their gifts filling the new kitchen, Caroline found Colt in the barn and collapsed into his arms, sobbing. But these were good tears, healing tears, tears of a woman who'd finally found her place in the world. "They accepted me," she wept. "They really accepted me." "Of course they did," Colt murmured into her hair. "How could they not? You're remarkable, Caroline Ramsey." The family moved into the new house in early June, and it felt like stepping into a dream. Caroline had a proper kitchen with a cast-iron stove and plenty of counter space. Lily had her own room painted soft yellow with curtains Caroline had sewn herself. There was a nursery ready for the new baby, and a bedroom for Caroline and Colt that was 3 times the size of their old one. That first night in the new house, after Lily was tucked into her new bed and they'd christened every room with their presents, Caroline and Colt lay together in their big new bed, wrapped in each other's arms. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Caroline asked. "When you first saw me?" "Every day," Colt admitted. "I think about how close I came to not stopping, to just assuming someone else would help. And then I think about everything I would have missed, you, Lily, this life we've built. Best decision I ever made, Caroline." "Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Caroline said, "to coming here, to staying, to marrying you, to all of it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together in their new home. 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful from the ruins. Caroline's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. By August, her belly was round and prominent, and Lily, now nearly 2 and walking confidently, liked to pat it and babble to her future sibling. The ranch was thriving under Colt's management, and word had spread about Caroline's refuge work. She received letters from Missouri regularly, updating her on the women who'd passed through the boarding house and successfully rebuilt their lives. But in September, just as the heat began to break, trouble arrived in an unexpected form. A man rode up to the ranch one afternoon, well-dressed and official-looking, asking for Mrs. Caroline Ramsey. Colt met him at the door, his posture protective. "My name is Jonathan Winters," the man said. "Thomas Winters was my brother." Caroline's blood went cold. She stepped out onto the porch, one hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. "What do you want?" Jonathan Winters removed his hat, his expression pained but sincere. "I came to apologize. I only recently learned about what happened between you and my brother, about the lies he told and the pain he caused. My sister-in-law's attempt to destroy you through the courts. I knew nothing about it until it was over, but I was horrified when I discovered the truth. Why come here now? Colt demanded. Why drag all this up again? Because I found something that belongs to Mrs. Ramsey, Jonathan said. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wooden box. These are letters Thomas wrote but never sent. His personal journals. In them he confesses everything, the lies he told Caroline, his guilt over abandoning her, his knowledge that Lily was his daughter. He held out the box. I thought you should have them. Not for legal purposes, but because they prove you were telling the truth all along. My brother was the villain in this story, not you. Caroline took the box with shaking hands. Why would you give me these? They make your family look terrible. Because it's the truth, Jonathan said simply, and because I believe in taking responsibility for the harm our family has caused. If there's anything I can do to make amends, money, support for your refuge work, anything, please let me know. After Jonathan left, promising to contribute financially to the Missouri boarding house, Caroline opened the box with Colt beside her. Inside were dozens of letters in Thomas's handwriting, addressed to her but never sent. She read a few, her heart breaking at the apologies and confessions written by a man too cowardly to send them. He knew what he'd done was wrong, she said quietly. He knew, and he did nothing to make it right while he was alive. Some people can only face their guilt in private, Colt said. But at least now you have proof, Caroline, proof that none of this was your fault. Caroline closed the box and set it aside. I don't need proof anymore. I know who I am, and I know what I survived. That's enough. She burned the letters the next day, watching as Thomas Winters' final confessions turned to ash. She didn't need his guilt or his apologies. She'd built a life without them, and that life was full and rich and real. In October, on a crisp autumn morning with leaves turning gold outside her window, Caroline gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long but straightforward, and when Doc Harris finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Caroline felt complete in a way she'd never known was possible. What should we name him? Colt asked, gazing at his son with wonder. I was thinking William, Caroline said. After your father. William Ramsey. Colt's eyes filled with tears. My father would have loved you, he said. He would have been so proud of this family we've built. Little William was a good baby, easy-tempered and content. Lily adored him immediately, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feedings. The house that had seemed so large now felt perfectly sized, filled with laughter and love and the comfortable chaos of family life. But the true test of how far Caroline had come arrived in December, when the town decided to hold a Christmas social and specifically invited the Ramsey family to attend. Caroline was nervous about going, about facing the community that had once shunned her, but Colt insisted they should go. You've earned your place here, he said, and I want everyone to see what a remarkable woman my wife is. The social was held in the church hall, decorated with pine boughs and candles. When Caroline and Colt arrived with Lily and William, conversation didn't stop as it once might have. Instead, people came forward to greet them, to coo over the baby, to compliment Caroline's dress, and ask about the new house. Emma Brennan pulled her aside to introduce her to several new arrivals in town, speaking of Caroline with respect and affection. Even Constance Hartwell approached, though her manner was subdued. Your son is beautiful, Mrs. Ramsey, she said. You have a lovely family. Thank you, Caroline said sincerely. How are you, Mrs. Hartwell? Constance's smile was sad but genuine. I'm learning to be kinder, to judge less. You taught me that. She paused. I heard about the boarding house you're running in Missouri. I'd like to contribute if you'd accept it. I'd be honored, Caroline said, and meant it. As the evening wore on, Caroline found herself standing by the punch bowl, watching Colt dance with Lily to the fiddler's music. Her son was asleep in her arms, warm and safe. Around her, people chatted and laughed, and she was part of it, truly part of it, no longer the outsider, but a valued member of the community. You look happy, a voice said. Caroline turned to find Sarah Mitchell, looking healthy and confident in a new dress she'd sewn herself. She'd come to the social with a young farmer who'd been courting her for the past month, a kind man who knew about little Thomas and loved the boy anyway. I am happy, Caroline said, happier than I ever thought possible. You saved me, Sarah said quietly. When I showed up at your ranch, I'd lost all hope. But you showed me that life goes on, that we can build something new even after everything falls apart. I'll never forget that. We save each other, Caroline said. That's how it works. As Sarah drifted back to her farmer, Caroline felt Colt's arm slip around her waist. Ready to go home? He asked. Yes, Caroline said, looking up at her husband. Let's go home. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, with Lily asleep against Colt's shoulder and William nestled in Caroline's arms. The December sky was clear and full of stars, and the new house glowed with lamplight in the distance. As they pulled up, Caroline thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The pain and betrayal, the desperate train journey, the abandoned platform, and the dusty cowboy who'd offered help without conditions. She thought about the woman she'd been, frightened, ashamed, certain her life was over, and the woman she'd become, strong, confident, surrounded by love. What are you thinking about? Colt asked as he helped her down from the wagon. About beginnings, Caroline said, and how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Colt smiled and kissed her forehead. I'm glad your worst moment led you to me. Me too, Caroline whispered. They carried their sleeping children inside, tucked them into their beds, and stood together in the doorway of the nursery, watching William's tiny chest rise and fall. I want to expand the refuge, Caroline said suddenly. Not just the boarding house in Missouri, but here too. We have the space, the resources. We could build a proper shelter, help more women like Sarah. Colt looked at her with that expression she'd come to know so well, love mixed with admiration and a hint of amusement at her endless capacity for dreaming bigger. All right, he said. Let's do it. Let's build something that'll outlast us both, something that'll help women for generations to come. You mean it? Caroline asked. I've never been more serious, Colt said. We'll call it Haven House, a place where broken things get mended and new lives begin. Caroline threw her arms around his neck. Have I told you lately that you're the best man I've ever known? You might have mentioned it, Colt said with a grin, but I never get tired of hearing it. That winter, they began planning Haven House in earnest. They would build it on the eastern edge of their property, close enough for Caroline to oversee, but separate enough to give the women privacy. It would have room for 6 families, a communal kitchen, a schoolroom for children, and a workshop where women could learn trades. Colt donated the land and labor, while Caroline used money from the Winters estate to fund construction and operations. Word spread quickly, and donations began arriving from unexpected places. Constance Hartwell contributed generously, as did Jonathan Winters and several wealthy families from Fort Worth who'd heard about the project. Even the church in Willow Bend held a fundraiser, collecting enough money to furnish an entire dormitory. By the spring of 1877, Haven House opened its doors. The first resident was a young widow with 3 children, fleeing an abusive brother-in-law who'd tried to claim her farm. The second was a woman who'd been fired from her teaching position for refusing a wealthy patron's advances. The third was a girl barely 17, pregnant and terrified, who reminded Caroline so much of herself that she wept when she first embraced her. Caroline divided her time between her own family and Haven House, finding fulfillment in both. She taught the women how to cook and manage households, helped them find employment in town, and most importantly, showed them that their past mistakes didn't define their future. Colt helped too, teaching the older children how to care for animals and work the land, giving them skills they could use to support themselves. By the time William took his first steps that summer, Haven House had sheltered 18 women and 23 children. 4 of the women had found employment in town, 3 had remarried good men who knew their situations and loved them anyway, and 2 had started their own businesses with loans Caroline had arranged through Henderson. But the true measure of their success came one autumn evening when Caroline was rocking William to sleep and heard a knock at the door. Colt answered it to find a woman in her 30s, well-dressed and confident, holding the hand of a girl about 5 years old. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late," the woman said, "but I wanted to thank Mrs. Ramsey personally. 5 years ago, I stayed at her boarding house in Missouri. I was destitute, pregnant, and had nowhere to turn. Mrs. Peterson took me in, gave me shelter and hope. I rebuilt my life, found good work, and eventually married a wonderful man. She gestured to the little girl. This is my daughter, Grace. She's healthy and happy and growing up knowing she's loved. And it's all because Mrs. Ramsey had the courage to build something that helps women like us. Caroline came to the door, William drowsing against her shoulder. I'm so glad, she said, tears in her eyes. That's exactly what I hoped would happen. You changed my life, the woman said, and I wanted you to know that I'm paying it forward. I've opened my home to women in crisis, just like you did for me. The kindness you showed me is spreading, Mrs. Ramsey. It's becoming something bigger than either of us. After the woman left, Caroline turned to Colt. Did you hear that? She's helping others now. It's working, Colt. It's really working. Of course it's working, Colt said, pulling her close. You're changing the world, Caroline. One woman at a time. The years that followed were full and rich. Caroline and Colt had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose and another son named Jack. Lily grew into a smart, confident girl who loved helping at Haven House and talked about becoming a teacher. William was adventurous and kind-hearted, already showing signs of his father's quiet strength. The ranch prospered. Haven House expanded to accommodate 10 families, and the boarding house in Missouri became a model that other communities began to replicate. But through it all, Caroline never forgot where she'd come from. She never forgot the terror of standing on that train platform with nowhere to go, the crushing shame of being judged and found wanting, the desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, life could be better. On a warm spring afternoon in 1882, Caroline stood on the porch of her beautiful house, watching her children play in the yard. Colt came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Do you ever regret it? He asked. The hard times? The struggle? Everything you went through? Caroline thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about Thomas Winter's betrayal, about Robert Tenley's abandonment, about the cruel whispers and the desperate fear. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up entirely. No, she said finally, because all of that led me here, to you, to our children, to this life. I wouldn't change any of it, because changing it would mean losing what we have now. I love you, Colt said simply. I love you too, Caroline replied. Thank you for saving me. No, Colt said, turning her to face him. Thank you for letting me be part of your story. You saved yourself, Caroline. I just gave you a place to land. Caroline smiled up at her husband, the man who'd stepped out of the dust 7 years ago and changed everything. We saved each other, she said, and now we get to help others do the same. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Caroline Ramsey looked at the life she'd built and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The frightened woman who'd stepped off that train was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and filled with purpose. She'd been abandoned at the altar, left with nothing but shame and a baby she didn't know how to provide for. But she'd survived. More than survived, she'd thrived, and in doing so, she'd created something that would help countless other women do the same. That night, as Caroline tucked Lily into bed, her daughter asked a question that made her pause. Mama, were you always brave? Caroline smoothed Lily's dark hair and thought about how to answer. No, sweetheart. I was scared for a very long time, but I learned that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. Like when you helped the ladies at Haven House? Lily asked. Exactly like that, Caroline said. Those women are some of the bravest people I know, because they chose to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. I want to be brave like them, Lily said. Like you. Caroline kissed her daughter's forehead. You already are, my love. You already are. As she left Lily's room and walked down the hallway of her beautiful home, past the nursery where William and Rose slept, past the room where Jack was already snoring softly, Caroline felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her life hadn't turned out anything like she'd planned, but it had turned out better than she'd ever dreamed. She found Colt in their bedroom, standing by the window and looking out at the ranch that had become their kingdom. He turned when she entered and held out his hand. Come here, he said softly. Caroline crossed to him and let him pull her close. They stood together in the darkness, watching the stars emerge one by one across the vast Texas sky. "Do you think we'll be together forever?" Caroline asked, a question she'd never dared ask before. "Forever and then some," Colt said without hesitation. "This life, the next one, and everyone after that. You're stuck with me, Caroline Ramsey." "Good," Caroline said, resting her head against his chest, "because I can't imagine my life without you." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, secure in their love and their purpose. And when Caroline finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed not of the past but of the future, of children growing up strong and confident, of women finding hope and rebuilding their lives, of a legacy that would outlast them both. She'd been broken, abandoned, and left for dead by a world that judged without mercy. But she'd refused to stay down. She'd gotten back up, brushed off the dust, and built something beautiful from the ruins of her shattered dreams. And that, Caroline knew as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest victory of all.